vertebral column. It's called vertebral column because every single bone that you have in here is going to be a vertebrae. This is a vertebrae, this is a vertebrae, this is a vertebrae. So then all of them are going to be vertebrae. We have vertebrae in our neck. They are going to be called cervical vertebrae. There are going to be 7 of those. Then we have the thoracic vertebrae from there to here. Then one's in blue. Okay, those are going to be 12. And then from here to the bottom right here, those are going to be the lumbar vertebrae, and those are going to be 5 right there. All the vertebrae are going to be, they're going to have more or less the same characteristics, so they can articulate with each other. So they're going to be like this. And they're going to have some processes right here. So one thing to consider in here is that all the vertebrae are going to be the same except the first 2. The reason for that, if you really think about it, this part is kind of in the vertebrae, this part is kind of like flat right there. But right here we have our skull is kind of like round like this. So there's an issue here because you have something round trying to articulate with something that is actually kind of like flat. For that reason, the first 2 vertebrae are going to be somewhat different. The first vertebrae, the one in red, is going to be called the atlas. The second vertebrae is going to be called the axis. And from there, all the other vertebrae are going to have more or less the same characteristics. We have right here, this is the first vertebrae, which is going to be called the atlas, as I mentioned before. Okay, as you can see, the atlas is going to have a hole. We said that a hole in any bone is going to be a foramen, right? So then this is the vertebrae. So then this is going to be the vertebral foramen. Now, as we said before, inside each one of the vertebrae, there's a hole, and inside there, you're going to have right here like this. You're going to have your spinal cord like that. So going back right here, so we were talking about the atlas, in which we have the articulating surfaces right here. We have the vertebral foramen right here. In front, you're going to have anterior tubercle, posterior tubercle, and on the side, you're going to have a process. This is process like this. This process is going to be like that. So therefore, this is going to be a transverse process. As you can see here, it's the same thing. Transverse process right here, and transverse process right here. In the transverse process, you're going to have a transverse foramen in the atlas. This is going to be for the blood vessels to take blood to your brain. The second vertebrae is going to be the axis. This is the axis. In the axis, again, you already know we have the foramen. We have the transverse process, similar to what we have in the atlas. And now you're going to have an spinous process. Now, this vertebrae starts looking more like the other vertebrae that we're going to have. So if you pay attention to the vertebrae, then we have 2 types of processes, right? This one right here is going to be the spinous process, and this one and this one are going to be the transverse process. Now, this one has one important characteristic, which is this part, this bony part right here that goes up like this. This is going to be called the dens or odontoid process. So this goes upwards like this. This is the second vertebrae. The first vertebrae is going to be the atlas, which is this one. So then this top part right here, this dens, that articulates with the atlas right here. So that part goes here. So the dens will go over here more or less like this. And down here you will have the axis down there. And this bar right here goes like that. The reason why I'm mentioning that is because now you have an articulation in here. You will have the articulation of this part right here, of this bone, or the atlas, and this part right here, which is the dens from the second vertebrae or the axis. And now you have 2 bones together. 2 bones together are going to form a joint. So you put a ligament right here, and now you have these 2 bones forming a joint. This is going to be called the atlantoaxial joint. So then if we keep going down then to the next type of vertebrae, we have the cervical vertebrae right here. So remember, the first 2 are different. Now we have other characteristics that you have right here. So then we said we're going to have a hole in all the vertebrae, cervical vertebral foramen. We're going to have the transverse process, 1 and 2 right there. We're going to have the spinous process, and we're going to have the body right here. Okay, now you also have the superior articulating facet, which is to articulate with the vertebrae on top. And you have the inferior articulating facet, is to articulate with the vertebrae at the bottom. So if we go over here, thoracic vertebrae, the vertebrae we have in the thorax. So then what do we have? We have the hole. What's the hole? Vertebral foramen. Where do we have this? Spinous process, transverse process, body, superior articulating facet, inferior articulating facet. If we go to the next vertebrae, which is the lumbar vertebrae, so you're going to have the same thing: vertebral foramen, transverse process, spinous process, body, superior articulating facet, inferior articulating facet. You see the same thing for all of them. So we said that we have the vertebrae are going to form the vertebral column. The vertebral column is going to start right here at the base of your skull. So here's your vertebral column, and your vertebral column is going to end on this bone right here. And we said this bone right here is going to be the sacrum. At the bottom, you're going to have the coccyx right there. So if we look at the sacrum, right, this is the anterior view of the sacrum, where you can see right here these holes. Remember, holes is a foramen, but these ones are tiny holes, so they are going to be called foramina. Since this is the anterior view, this is going to be the anterior sacral foraminus, as you can see right here. Now, there's going to be this groove communicating each one of the foraminats. These are going to be the transverse lines or transverse ridges. Now, on this side, you're going to have the ala. And right here, the top is the sacral promontory. So your vertebral column comes over here, and it's going to basically articulate right there. So then this part right here is going to be a sacral promontory. This is the anterior view. In the posterior view of this bone, where you're going to have these little holes, but these ones are going to be the posterior foraminus. You have these bumps right here. They are going to be the sacral median crest, this one right here. This has a hole right here. This is going to be a sacral canal. It's not actually a hole, but this is called, it's kind of like a tube right here, right? So therefore, this is going to be called a sacral canal, as you can see right there, because the canal will go, will open in here and will end, will continue right here like that, right? So then that's the sacral canal. This is what we mentioned was the ala right here. All this that you can see right here, that's the ala, and here again you have another ala. But this one right here is going to be the coccyx right here. Okay, that's the very, very bottom of the bones that we have in that area. The next one that we're going to have is going to be the sternum. Sternum right there. That's the sternum. The top of the sternum is going to be the manubrium. The middle is going to be the body. And the tip is going to be the xiphoid process. That's what you're having here. Manubrium, body, and xiphoid process. And they're at the very bottom. This bone is very important. This bone is going to help us articulate with the ribs. Okay, so then you have to remember, what do you have on the back? On the back, you're going to have your vertebrae. What do you have on the front? You're going to have your sternum. And the ribs will go from the vertebrae like this. So the ribs will go like this, right? They go like this around to the front, right? And they're going to articulate with the sternum. So on the back, the ribs are going to articulate with the vertebrae, and on the front, they are going to articulate with the sternum. Not all of them, right? But some of them will articulate with the sternum. Okay, so then we have the clavicle right here. The clavicle is going to be connecting your sternum with your shoulder. The clavicle is going to have two ends. As you can see here, there's one end in here, the other one is going to be in here. So this is going to be called the acromial end, and this is going to be called the sternal end. Right here at the bottom, you can see here you have a conoid tubercle. So then if I show you this again, this figure, then you can see right here the sternum. And right here is your clavicle. Right, so then you can see this is going to be the sternal end, because this is the sternum, and this part right here is going to be the acromion. Therefore, this is acromial end. So if we look over here, now we have the ribs. We have 12 ribs. Okay, and what we're going to have in the ribs, you're going to have a head. If you have a head, it's because you have a neck, right? Every single time you have a head, you have to have a neck. So you have a head, neck, and a tubercle. Those are the most important characteristics you have in the rib. But then you have a curved area right here, which is going to be the angle. This part right here is going to articulate with the vertebrae. As I mentioned before, the ribs are going to articulate with the vertebrae on one side, and on the other end, they're going to articulate with the sternum. So this part right here, you can clearly see that right here, articulating with the vertebrae right there. So you have the head, neck, and tubercle. You have the angle, and then this part right here is going to be the one that is going to be in contact basically with the sternum using a cartilage. If we scroll down right here, we can see that we have true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. The true ribs are considered like that because they have their own connection, individual connection with the sternum. So here's your sternum again. So you have this rib right here, coming like this, and it's going to end right there. This is the cartilage. So this rib has its own cartilage connecting it to the sternum. So when you have unique cartilage, you see this one has its own cartilage, this one has its own cartilage, and then those are going to be called true ribs. The false ribs are these ones right here at the bottom, right there. This ones and this ones. They're going to be called false because they're going to share that cartilage that connects them to the sternum. You see this one comes over here, like that, but you see this one comes over here and merges in there. And this one also merges in here, and they have one common cartilage connecting them to the sternum. Therefore, they're going to be considered false. And then you have these ones right here at the very bottom that you can see there, they don't connect to the sternum at all. And those are going to be considered floating ribs. Okay, so then you have true, false, and floating ribs. True ribs are going to be the first 7 ribs, then the bottom 4, from basically the 8th to the 12th rib, that's going to be false. And then at the very, very, very bottom, we have 2 basically floating ribs. Okay, in this figure, you can see here the scapula, right? That is behind the thoracic cavity. You can see that in here, right there. If we look over here, now we have the scapula now with both views. This one right here is the posterior view. This one right here is the anterior view. As you can see in there in the anterior view, you do not have the spine in here. That's going to be in the posterior view. So we said in the posterior view, we're going to have the spine, and we said the top of the spine is going to be right here, the acromion. This acromion is the same way. It's the same thing that you see right here. This is just anterior view. That's the acromion. Below the acromion, I told you you're going to have this cavity, which is going to be the cleanoid cavity. And on the other side of the acromion, you're going to have the coracoid process, this one right here, the coracoid process. This is the spine again. This space that you have on top of the spine is the supraspinous fossa. This space that you have right here below the spine is going to be the infraspinous fossa, and those are in the posterior view. In the anterior view, you're going to have this one, which is going to be called the subscapular fossa. Right there. The top is the superior border. The bottom is going to be inferior angle. The side, you're going to have the lateral border right there. Okay, so then those are the markings that you have right there in the scapula.